Well, for those of us who were there, 1968 was certainly the worst of times. You know, the old Charles Dickens novel, Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. No, there were no best of times in 1968. 1968 was an incredibly grim year. It began with the TET Offensive. And what happened, we'd gone into this kind of strange habit. You don't often find this in warfare where both sides would recognize each other's holidays. So, like, we would have Thanksgiving, and they would give us 3 days off from fighting. And Tet, Vietnamese New Year, would give them, I don't know how many days off from fighting. But anyway, so both sides would stand down. And So in 1968, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, which is a southern element of the North Vietnamese, um, they offered us a truce. We accepted it. And to cover that truce, we were attacked, and you can see here from one end of Vietnam to the other. It was a massive show of strength on their part. And frankly, we just knocked the hell out of them. They suffered a terrible military defeat in coming out in the open where we could get at them. And Some of the fighting was pretty rough, uh, but truthfully, militarily, it was a victory for us. But in terms of PR, it looked like after all the fighting we had done that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong could simply, take a hit and keep on going. That wasn't true, but the reality is that was what people perceived, and so now more and more people turn against the war. This is what it looks like when someone has their head blown off. This was a Viet Cong or North Vietnamese infiltrator in the city of Hue. And the photographer had the good luck to snap this photo at the exact moment the bullet hit the fellow's head. The fellow on the left is the police chief, and so he just executed an infiltrator. Um, and you know, War is tough. War is hell, and it certainly was. In April, Dr. King was shot. And I mean, it was once again sitting at home. If I remember correctly, I was sitting in our easy chair, and my father was doing some work at the table. And the moment the news came over that he'd been shot, we didn't know he was dead. Then he was shot. My father jumped out of his chair and went over to went dove. We lived near Tampa in those days, and he was foreman for a warehouse, and he he drove into town to try to get his people out of Tampa before they were injured, because he had a pretty good idea what was going to happen next. Dr. King, of course, 39 years of age, terrible ending. It was sad. That night, 100 cities burned. They had to call in the 82nd Airborne, which is one of the two crack divisions, the 101st and the 82nd, that we have. And yeah, I think this is Newark, New Jersey, if I remember correctly. And places just cities all of you have never seen anything like this unless you're about my age. And it was just very, very rough. Uh, Fortunately, no, I don't know that there was any fortunately to this, but cities everywhere just burned down. It was rioting at its absolute worst, and some cities, by the way, have never recovered from that night. Um, in June, Robert Kennedy had declared his candidacy for the U.S. presidency. He was running for the Democratic nomination. It very tough battle between himself, the sitting vice president, a fellow by the name of Hubert Humphrey, another senator by the name of Eugene McCarthy, and so Bobby Kennedy comes in. He wins California. The ballroom he had hired to have his celebration that night was packed full of people, and so he decided to take a shortcut through the kitchen, and incredibly, a fellow by the name of Sirhan, who you know had would not have any chance of shooting him, had come planned to shoot him. And he had a pistol in his pocket, and all of a sudden his target was right in front of him. He just whipped out the pistol and shot him in the back of the head. He lingered on for about 48 hours, and then he died. Um, my parents uh, used to get up and listen to the weather because my father would send trucks out during the day, and they always want to know what the truck was. And they always kept the news, the weather down low, so they wouldn't wake me. But this day, they didn't bother to do that. So I got in my blue bathrobe and I padded out to where it was going, and obviously, just as you would expect, the news was all about this, and it was another tragedy for the Kennedy family. And, whether you were Democrat or Republican, it was a tragedy for the country. Very sad. In August 1968, we have what you can call a riot. This is in Chicago. And what happened is a group of people called yuppies organized to try to bust up the Democratic National Convention. They did a pretty good job of it, too. Now, the police were waiting for them. So what you have is fighting in downtown Chicago of incredible intensity. I mean, some of this fighting spills over into hotel lobbies. I know I have seen it classified as a police riot. That's not the picture I saw. I think both sides gave out pretty much as good as they got, and it turned into it turned into something. But just think about this: if you had been a country overseas, if you had been the leader of a country overseas, the picture you're getting of America is that it has simply stopped working and is about to fall apart. Although we win militarily in TET, we lose in terms of PR. Dr. King is shot standing on a motel balcony in Memphis. Bobby Kennedy is shot, a candidate for the presidency. And then, of course, 100 cities burned down, by the way. That usually doesn't happen in a country be able to withstand it. And then in August, even an attempt to pick a presidential nominee for the Democratic Party turns into utter and complete chaos. It was, again, unless you're near my age, you've never experienced anything like this. I mean, 9/11 came and went in one day, and of course the aftershocks went on for weeks afterwards. But it was relentless. You never had any idea what was going to happen next. And so, you can't gel the revolution. These seemed to be revolutionary times, but of course they weren't. At least not in the almost sense of a political revolution. Were they a revolution in terms of the politics? Were they a revolution in terms of lifestyle? Were they, a revolution, at least to some degree, in terms of economics and identification and all that stuff? I think you could make that case. But in terms of an old-fashioned power to the people, revolution, I don't think that occurred. But nevertheless, people had these romantic notions about revolt and things like that. Well, a revolution was occurring, but people expect revolutions to end up with guillotines and firing squads, and the king being overthrown or something like that, and the government being overthrown. That's not what happened. What happened is how we lived and how we thought about living in America. That was a revolution. It was a revolution of some size. In November You had a contest between, in the November presidential election, you had a contest between Richard Nixon, who was going to win, going to be a close election, but he's still going to win, Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic nominee who came out of that mess in Chicago, and this really odd guy by the name of George Wallace. Wallace had been the segregationist governor of Alabama. At one time stood in the door of the University of Alabama and refused to allow it to be integrated. He used to say, segregation now, segregation forever. And then, that doesn't sell very well after, except in a few southern states. And so he runs for the presidency on a law and order ticket. He's a third party candidate, but he's going to do very well. He's going to get a lot of votes. And some of them, by the way, came out of the Northeast, and some of them came out of the upper Midwest. So his appeal wasn't just limited, but he ran in this chaotic situation, he ran on law and order. In 1972, when the idea of busing people long distances to achieve racial equality was really toxic. I mean, who, after all, and I understand parents being concerned about this. Who wants their child bus 2 hours one way and then 2 hours coming back? Um, you know, um, I get that. And so essentially, Wallace, of course, is here running as an anti-school bus person. And in 1976, Wallace ran again for the presidency. This time he's going to, and he's going to come awfully close to getting the nomination, except for the fact that in Laurel, Maryland, he's campaigning on the day of one of the primaries, and somebody reaches over from the back of the crowd and shoots him. Wallace will live, but he's paralyzed. Um, and, you know, who knows what could have happened if he hadn't been shot that day, because he's clearly had a head of steam. The Democratic Party, which had suffered an absolute disaster in 1972 with a very liberal candidate, it might have been open to a conservative candidate. And, who knows? Certainly, a Southerner is nominated that year by the Democratic Party, a fellow from Georgia by the name of Jimmy Carter. Um, could George Wallace have won? No, I, he might have. He might have won the nomination. Whether or not he could have won the presidency, I don't know. But I don't think it's out of the question that he could have won the Democratic nomination. No. Anyway, 1968. It's there. It's in the books. It's over with. I suppose we've never actually recovered from 68. Um, Not in a lot of ways, but I wish you all good health. And I certainly hope that, we'll meet again. Uh, Take care, everyone.